mine, Leon Ferguson. We wanted to do a follow-up to one of our Thursdays lives with Bridges. Some of you may have seen that Deb and Kyle hosted earlier, and I wanted to share some tips on leadership. So we're going to be short and sweet. I've got a few questions for Leon. He's going to share some knowledge on leadership and what some good qualities are. So thanks again for joining me, Leon.
Yeah, absolutely, buddy. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. No, it's great to have you here. And again, just to keep things quick, we're going to jump right into it. Leon, I wanted you to share with the audience here, what are, forgetting about what's going on right now in general, what are some qualities of a great leader that maybe might not be the obvious ones from your perspective?
Yeah, well, I mean, exactly. I'm not sure what the obvious ones are, but I guess what comes to mind for me would be there might be everybody's got the same kind of characteristics, or quality, sorry, but it's depending on the application and how you deliver it. So for me, I think it's going back to the basics on just being real, being in the conversation. So like being genuine with your leadership. I'm finding sometimes people were trying to use the correct buzzwords or of the day with no meaning behind them. I think it's, use your words. It's okay to be vulnerable and not know all the questions. Create a space for people to talk with you, troubleshoot and work through the problem together. I'm sure you've heard me say it, do it for the right reasons, the right things happen. I think it's important to be present. I think mentally present is what I mean. No looking at your phone when you're in a meeting with your team. I know there's a lot going on. I can appreciate that. But if you're engaged in the moment with your team, you will see such momentum. You'll gain so much further faster. There'll be less confusions and less internal meetings needed and overall time wasted. And I really think that the team really appreciates that. It shows your commitment as a leader. And it also works, it's also at the same time holds people accountable. So what I mean by that is don't just be there to be vulnerable, but also be accountable to the problem. So you set out some guidelines and some timelines and work with each other, figuring out who's going to do what, and then make sure we all execute on those plans. I think at the same time, be positive. It's very hard right now to be positive in these situations. Be positive and passionate, and never give up hope.
Those are great things for people to take away. And you nailed something right at the beginning, which I wanted to just touch on again, that having the skill set is one thing, but applying it is a whole different other thing. Like you might have a lot of the great skills of a leader, but are you actually applying that? Are you, like you said, being genuine and true to your style of leadership, or are you holding back for any sorts of reasons? And you talked a lot about being present. I think that's a great point to make, especially in these times. It's so easy to be distracted because there's a million things going on in the world to get distracted with. So focusing a bit on, the uncertain times we're in right now, what are some things that you think leaders need to be doing differently to manage their team best during the crisis that we're in?
Well, and I think you're right, especially right now. All companies were hit very hard. Look, I mean, some cases were decimated. There's forces that need to be made to survive. I guess what we try to look at is the silver lining in all of that, and I guess it's the ability to look at our businesses as needs versus wants. We now have the opportunity to reshape our businesses accordingly. So in some cases, with extreme optimism and confidence, you can now have a fresh start. Having that more risk-adverse experience, and that you can prevail through some of the most extreme times as possible. So I guess to me, some of the toolboxes what I would put in the toolbox would be the ability to be adaptive to change. The only absolute now is change. But it doesn't mean taking something away necessarily. It might mean doing something differently. So to me, I think it's important to have a plan. And then you do the plan, do, check, adjust scenario. So, whether that plan, you start off with a 90-day plan, then you break that down into a weekly plan, put that together. I think that's a good skill or a good leadership quality to have, or whatever you may,
Yeah.
And then communication, I think, is a big one. Like I said earlier, it's okay to be vulnerable. Be sincere and compassionate, but let's be clear, that doesn't mean weak. In fact, if you do it right, it shows strength. When you're in the moment with your team and you don't necessarily know all the answers, that's okay. I
Yeah.
think a lot of us as leaders, we get caught up on trying to be that rock, and have the answers for everybody, but that's not necessarily the case. In these times, we may not have those answers, but what we can do is work the problems together. And
Mhm.
9 times out of 10, when you come together as a group, you can solve some pretty significant problems in a very quick manner. So I think that that's important. And I think one of the big pieces to this whole thing would be the listening component, and coming into it with empathetic listening. So it's hard because as leaders, we all come in as problem solvers. That's part of the reason why we are leaders. However, during these times, sometimes it's not about solving the problem. It's about just listening, with the intent to understand and not respond. Sometimes your team just needs to come and talk to you and vent a little bit, or kind of get your perspective on something, but not necessarily a problem to solve. So I think that's important to do that. Kind of find out what their desirable outcome would be in that conversation, and then go from there. And
Mhm.
as well, patience. It's tough. It is tough right now to be patient. We're all kind of scrambling. Every day is a new day. We're all uneasy, but at the same time, if we go back to the fundamentals, and work those plans, be adaptable, we should be okay. And try to keep as much peace, inside as well as outside as possible.
I completely agree, and I'm so happy as I was listening to your response there. I'm glad you circled back to that being vulnerable piece, right? Because especially in the times like right now, where truly no one has a clue what's going to go on. Like the reopening, we don't know how that's going to fully go, what businesses will look like. Being adaptive and letting your team know that, hey, we're moving with the change, we're adapting, and I don't necessarily have all the answers, and that's okay. And I think you nailed it. It's not about a weakness. I think that's a strength as well, to be able to share with your team that, hey, I don't know what this is going to look like either,
Yeah.
but you guys just need to know that we're going to do our best to walk out on the other side stronger than we were before. So I'm really happy you circled back to that piece. And you touched on a bit of that listening to your team. And this segues a bit into my last question here, which is that mental health is a big thing that you and the folks at Bridges talk about a lot, and you really stress the importance of keeping ourselves mentally well. So what should leaders be doing right now to keep their own mental health in check a bit? And how can they maybe share some of that with their team, maybe through listening, but keeping themselves well as well?
Yeah, no, those are great points. And, just to just go back a little bit, that transparency piece is huge, I think, when you're being vulnerable in some cases. I mean, as much as possible, but I mean, people just want to know what's going on. And I think if you can be as transparent as possible, your team will really appreciate that. So to your questions right now, trying to keep yourself somewhat healthy. It's tough. These are scary times, no doubt about it. At the same time, though, I caution us to be careful with that, because in some cases, fear represents an acronym of false evidence appearing real. So we get ourselves caught up in some of these situations that may never come to fruition, but we seem to want to get in there with our thoughts. So I caution us all to be very careful with that. And I always use it in my head, and I say, keep out of the ruts. So you know what I mean? When you're driving,
Mhm.
keep your thoughts out of the ruts as much as possible. I mean, it's tough. Negative self-talk is tough. We all struggle with that. So to me, it's about understanding when that's coming, and saying, oh, okay, here he is again. Here's that nitpicking negative part of my mind trying to derail
Mhm.
my focus. So recognizing that, and then spinning that, and knowing that, hey, okay, that's that. I've got a plan. We're working through it, and then get back to focusing on that specific. So observing that negative, the negativity is there. I'm
Mhm.
not saying suppress it, acknowledge it, but then just let it flow through and get back to the work that at hand, I think, is a big one. Um, a lot of people kind of look at that and say around cognitive behavioral therapy is a good one too, like paying attention to the details of what you're doing. It kind of takes away from the fear of everything else. And make that plan adaptable. Don't set yourself into a structured plan where all of a sudden now, if it tomorrow comes with new information, oh no, you run the risk of getting yourself into more anxiety because you just developed a plan. So keep yourself a little bit more adaptive, and then set some macro goals, and then really focus in on your micro goals. I think that one is the key. And ultimately, it's about how we think through things, you know.
Mhm.
And I don't want to sound like, you know, lots of folks will say, oh, you just got to think positively and, you know, not face reality. The reality is that there's a lot going on. But as William James says, the greatest weapon against stress is our ability to choose one thought over another. So it's just about, you know, putting enough positives in your mind to offset when those negatives come in, if that makes sense. Taking care of yourself in the moment. I think so much we focus on, okay, I'll go for that walk after work, or I'll do this or that later.
Mhm.
But when you're in the moment, you know, you're getting some bad news or some things are going on. It's important to recognize, oh boy, okay, here comes the negative thoughts. How do I get positive thoughts going on? And you know what? Sometimes it's the easiest of things. So what I sometimes do is I just kind of take some big deep breaths, and it's kind of diaphragmatic breathing, or box breathing. So big breaths in, try to stick my stomach out for 4 seconds, hold it for 4 seconds, let go of it for 4 seconds, hold it for 4 seconds, then breathe back up. I mean, it sounds pretty elementary. Try it.
No, I
It's
get it, though. I get it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I'll tell you, like it takes 10 seconds, or 2 or 3 cycles, and you'll start to see. And then, you know, just thinking positive thoughts when you're breathing them in. Okay. And then how you want to execute those. And just, you know, maybe try that a couple of minutes every hour. And it actually, it does some great things for you. So that, and then, you know, honestly, just be kind to yourself. Recognize what we're going through. Don't dwell on it, but recognize it, and have some healthy habits, um, to get rid of that tightness, you know, that tightness in your chest,
Mhm.
tightness in overall body, whether that's exercise. I mean, obviously it's important to do that, but you be you. I always say that. I don't know if you've heard me talk before, but for me, an example is, you know, I'm not necessarily going to go break into a 5 mile run, but I'll go for a little walk. And then for me, I like to puzzle and, you know, and watch documentaries. That takes my mind
Yeah.
off things and slows everything down. So just
We, you know, we
be,
talked about that too, that puzzling thing. I think you mentioned to me when we were at some sort of Christmas party back in December. You talked about, well, yeah, what you wanted to get or something that you enjoyed as a hobby. You like puzzling. So I do remember that fact about you. And I love that you talked about the simple things like breathing, right?
mm,
Like this isn't rocket science. Just take, like you said, a minute to calm yourself down. You don't need any tools or any other people around. You just literally have to just breathe. And I've, you know, found from some meditating and things like that I've tried a couple times. It's that focusing on the breathing and acknowledging that, you know, thoughts might come in, negative thoughts might come in. It's okay. I really love that you pointed out that acknowledge it, don't try and suppress it. Like it's
mm,
there. Just
mm,
acknowledge it and then see how you can emerge, you know, a little bit more positive or feeling better or less stressed. So those are all some fantastic tools. I really appreciate you taking the time to share with
you
us.
bet.
We think it's important, especially in these times, for anyone, leaders, you know, in businesses or, you know, the family leaders, things like that. Like we all need to show a little bit of strength in our leadership and acknowledge that it's okay to be vulnerable and not know what's going to happen because we're in such uncertain times. So that's why I'm glad that I got you on today to share some of those tips. Hopefully for anyone watching that you can practice a couple of these things Leon has mentioned. If you'd like to learn more or hear more, we can absolutely bring someone like Leon back on to share some more ideas. And again, hope you've been keeping well, Leon, and I'm sure I'll see you around whenever I get to.
You bet, my man. Thanks for having me. And again, you know, just keep your team included as much as possible. Incorporate them with all your planning. Make solid plans. Be adaptable to change and stay positive. Thanks for having me on, Colton. You guys are an amazing team over there, a beacon of community support.
Do what we can. And thanks for watching, everyone.